Hi Tracy, it's Paxton. The date is April 13th. Happy Friday. And I am going to explain to you today what happens with the digestive process when you eat a cheeseburger, or really any food, but we will pretend it's a cheeseburger today. So, just quickly, I want to point out that in a cheeseburger, you have carbohydrates, you have lipids, you have proteins. These are all going to get broken down. And I will do my best to explain where within the digestive system, that path, that the digestion of the macromolecules occurs, because it differs depending on if it's a carbohydrate versus a lipid or a protein. Okay, so you ingest a cheeseburger into your mouth. That's step one. Get it into your oral cavity. There's a few accessory structures that are within your oral cavity that are going to help start breaking down and digesting the food. So, for example, your teeth begin mechanical digestion via mastication or chewing. You have salivary glands which secrete saliva, which moistens the food and helps with bolus formation. And saliva also contains the enzyme salivary amylase, which initiates the breakdown of carbohydrates and is going to continue acting until it's inactivated by stomach acids. You also have a tongue, which helps mix the food, forming it into a bolus. The tongue has taste buds and touch receptors that allow you to taste your food, to feel the texture and the temperature. And the tongue also has lingual glands, which secrete the enzyme lingual lipase. And lingual lipase is going to help break down triglycerides, but it's not going to begin working until it's activated in the stomach. So we'll get back to that point. So your food's been masticated, it's been moistened, it's been formed into this adequate size bolus. Now the tongue is going to help propel the food into the pharynx via swallowing. Once the bolus is in the pharynx constrictor muscles are going to contract, which forces the bolus into the esophagus. And then the bolus moves through the upper esophageal sphincter, and then rhythmic waves of peristalsis, propels the bolus through the lower esophageal sphincter and into the stomach. Okay, so now your food has made it to your stomach. What happens next? As I mentioned, a bit of carbohydrate digestion occurs in the mouth thanks to salivary amylase. However, more chemical digestion and the initiation of digestion for lipids and proteins is going to happen in the stomach. So the stomach contains gastric glands, which secrete a digestive fluid, which is called gastric juice. And there are also certain cells within the gastric glands that secrete hormones and enzymes that are going to assist with digestion. So this is not an all-inclusive list, but a few examples of the types of cells are parietal cells, which produce hydrochloric acid and intrinsic factor. So HCl is needed to activate the protein digesting enzyme called pepsin. An intrinsic factor is necessary for the absorption of vitamin B12 in the small intestines. You also have chief cells, which secrete pepsinogen, which is the inactive form of pepsin, that is going to break down proteins into peptides, like I mentioned. And then you have enteroendocrine glands, which secrete various hormones, including gastrin. And gastrin stimulates the release of gastric acid, which in turn induces parietal cells to increase their production of hydrochloric acid to activate pepsin to break down protein. So, bit complex, but just shows you how these enzymes and these hormones really help in the digestive process. So, in the stomach, there's also mechanical digestion that's going on. There's mixing waves, which are a form of peristalsis, and it's going to mix the food with the gastric juices and create chyme. The digestive activities of salivary amylase are going to continue breaking down carbohydrates until the food begins mixing with the acidic chyme, in which case, or what happens then is that the salivary amylase is inactivated by that acidity. But the chyme also activates lingual lipase, which begins breaking down triglycerides, lipids. So essentially, the stomach serves as a temporary holding chamber. Basically, it is going to parse out small amounts of chyme into the small intestines at a time. So in a process called gastric emptying, rhythmic mixing waves are going to force a bit of chyme through the pyloric sphincter and into the duodenum of the small intestines, just a bit at a time. We don't want to overwhelm the small intestines because it won't be able to handle that much chyme at once. So chyme enters the small intestines, and this is the part of the digestive tract that the most digestion and absorption is going to occur in. So there's three parts of the small intestines. There's the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. The small intestines also relies on three accessory organs, the liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. So let's briefly touch on what those accessory organs do, what their functions are. So the liver produces bile. Bile helps emulsify lipids, so it's obviously very important for digestion. The liver is also crucial to the body because it serves as a processing center. We'll come back to this in a bit, but I just want to mention that that is a very important thing about the liver. The gallbladder stores the bile that's been produced by the liver and then releases the bile into the small intestines when it's needed. The pancreas secretes pancreatic juice, which contains digestive enzymes and bicarbonate ions, and it delivers this to the duodenum of the small intestines as needed. Okay, so in the small intestines, digestion's happening. The digestion of proteins and carbohydrates, which has partially occurred in the stomach, is going to be completed in the small intestine with the aid of intestinal and pancreatic juices, as well as microvilli, which contain enzymes that finish digesting these micromolecules. Lipids, on the other hand, arrive in the small intestines basically undigested. So digestion is going to be facilitated by bile and the enzyme pancreatic lipase. Now, those are chemical means of digestion. We also have mechanical digestion that happens in the small intestines, and that is in the form of segmentation and migrating motility complexes. So in segmentation, basically it combines the chyme with digestive juices and then pushes the particles against the mucosa to be absorbed. Migrating motility complexes, on the other hand, force chyme through the small intestines, through the ileocecal valve, and into the first portion of the large intestines, which is called the cecum. So it kind of is a stop and go mechanism, but it basically gets it through the small intestines, gets the chyme through the small intestines and into the large intestines. I also want to mention that the nervous system and the endocrine system are really integrated into the digestive system. And this is a really good way to point it out is digestive activity in the stomach provokes the gastroileal reflex, which increases the force of the ileal segmentation. So that shows that nervous system innervation within the digestive system. Now, the stomach also releases the hormone gastrin, which enhances the ileal motility and relaxes the ileocecal sphincter and allows food into the large intestines. So that shows how the endocrine system has an influence on the digestive system. So just want to make sure I'm connecting how interconnected the body is, if that makes sense. Okay, so as I mentioned, almost all absorption happens in the small intestines. So 90% of the water that you ingest is absorbed here. And this is also the part where the liver is going to come into play. So nutrient-rich blood from the small intestines is going to be carried to the liver via the hepatic portal vein. And basically, like I said, the liver is this processing center. Some things that happen there. Excess sugars are going to be stored as glycogen, and they'll be stored in the liver. You have fatty acids, which are used to generate cholesterol, and then they're transported to other parts of the body. You have amino acids that are converted into critical proteins. And the liver also extracts and detoxifies harmful substances before they can enter general circulation. And so basically it's protecting other organs from being damaged by poisons. And so once the blood has gone through this processing center of the liver, it can then be sent on to the heart for systemic circulation. Okay, so finally, food, or what's left remaining that hasn't been digested and absorbed, is going to enter the large intestines. There are four main regions of the large intestine. There's the cecum, the colon, the rectum, and the anus. And chemical digestion and absorption, as well as some synthesizing of new vitamins, is going to be aided by the bacterial flora, so the normal bacteria that lives within your large intestines. And the bacteria also helps break down some of the remaining carbohydrates if there's any left. The residue of chyme that enters the large intestines contains few nutrients at this point, really except for water, and that water is going to be reabsorbed. So the large intestines, absorbs that last water. And when it does this, it converts the liquid chyme into semi-solid feces. And the feces are then going to be eliminated from the body because it's waste products, things the body can't absorb. So the feces travel from the colon into the rectum, which stretches the rectal wall and provokes the defecation reflex, which eliminates feces from the rectum. And the reason I want to point this out is because it's another example of how the nervous system and the digestive system are connected, because that defecation reflex is actually a parasympathetic reflex that's mediated by the spinal cord. So, thought it was important to point out. And essentially, at this point, feces are going to pass through from the rectum, through the anal canal, through the internal and external anal sphincters, and then leave the body through the anus to be eliminated. Okay, so I think that basically explains the whole process. I hope it was thorough. I hope I also was able to make some connections for you about other systems in the body that the digestive system is connected to. I look forward to your feedback and filming my next video for you. Thanks so much. Bye.